As it seems to be a good morning for poetry, I wanted to share, before I begin my sermon, my own favorite piece of writing on the subject of pain, one that I turn to again and again. These are the words of Lebanese artist, poet, and mystic Khalil Gibran from his work, The Prophet. He writes, "Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Even as the stone of the fruit must break, that its heart may stand in the sun, so must you know pain. And could you keep your heart in wonder at the daily miracles of your life, your pain would not seem less wondrous than your joy, and you would accept the seasons of your heart, even as you have always accepted the seasons that pass over your fields. And you would watch with serenity through the winters of your grief. Much of your pain is self-chosen. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore, trust the physician and drink the remedy in silence and tranquility. For his hand, though heavy and hard, is guided by the tender hand of the unseen. And the cup he brings, though it burn your lips, has been fashioned of the clay which the potter has moistened with her own sacred tears." The words of Khalil Gibran. A few months ago, I spoke from this pulpit about the importance of making meaning out of suffering. I drew on the work of Viktor Frankl to examine how looking for and hopefully finding lessons or significance in moments of extremity can truly make the difference between life and death. Or put less dramatically, Frankl said that a person who has a why to live for can endure almost any how. To Frankl, whose work drew on his experiences during internment in several Nazi concentration camps, there is never an experience in life that cannot be the source of growth. There is never a moment where we find ourselves without choices about how to conduct ourselves and how to understand our experiences. We may not always recognize and grab these choices, but it is profoundly empowering to realize that life is not meaningless. Rather, that life is as full of meaning, as full of as much meaning as we are able to imbue it with. In the final analysis, each one of us has the great power and the great responsibility to pursue and embrace meaning. As Unitarian Universalists, we see this in our first and fourth principles. At our best, we are communities that affirm and promote each person's inherent worth and dignity, and in our coming together, we responsibly guide and encourage one another as we search for truth and meaning. This morning, I want to look more closely at what it can look like to find meaning in pain, to offer encouragement for the moments when Spirit demands we turn towards our pain rather than away from it, and to share thoughts on possibly what landmarks and guideposts we might be alert for during those times when we are in the desolate, foggy heart of pain. Pain, hurt, and harm. We sometimes use these three related words interchangeably or at least neglect to distinguish between them. However, teasing them apart can reveal depths of meaning and open the way to reflecting on how we grow both as individuals and in our capacity to love and care for one another. Pain is the word we give to that family of sensations we experience when we encounter an especially intense or damaging stimulus, whether physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual. Hurt or suffering is the way we interpret that pain the emotional place where we begin to make sense of painful sensation. Harm or injury can be the result of pain and suffering, and it is not open to interpretation or negotiation. I phrased the title of this sermon and service in this way because I work in the healthcare environment, and because the phrase "do no harm" is so thoroughly associated with the field of medicine. In fact, you may even be laboring under the same misapprehension that I was before I began writing this sermon, that "do no harm" is an abridged version of the Hippocratic Oath. Whoops. The principle of non-maleficence, or primum non nocere, is one of the cornerstones of bioethics and is a principle that stands on its own and is not actually part of the Hippocratic Oath. Pedantics aside, this distinguishing of hurt from harm has been extremely helpful for me both in my work as a chaplain and in working to understand the course of my own life. To share a very small example, just as I endured the immediate hurt and pain of an emergency appendectomy last summer, to be spared from the harm of a ruptured appendix and septic infection, I have found that when looking at other painful moments in my life, that the hurts I endured often moved me away from greater harm, that even in moments of great sorrow, shame, and wounding, there were seeds of redemption and hope. I've spoken here before of my gloriously failed career as a carpenter, but it might be a new story for some, so please indulge me with a brief recap. When I was a few years out of college and certain down to my bones that I wanted nothing to do with art history, and also that I could be a fantastic success at anything I set my mind to, I got a job working as a laborer for a high-end remodeling and cabinetry company. I was certain that this was a career that I could find meaning and pleasure and experience in, but I did not, as they say, cover myself in glory. I was fired from that lowly position after less than 9 months, after 4 accidents involving the company dump truck. And worse than that, the cars of several of our customers. And after one morning, when crowbar in one hand, sledgehammer in another, and full of good intentions to throw myself into demolition work at a new job site, I found myself surprising a woman who was still in bed when I arrived to begin that demolition work. I did not at that moment realize that I had transposed the last 2 digits of the address and that the house I was hoping to demolish was halfway down the block. The company made the right decision in firing me. And frankly, they were incredibly patient, I think, to keep me on for that 9 months. I think I understood this even at the time. But that did not lessen the pain of being called into the office that Friday afternoon. Worse still was returning to pick up my belongings that evening and finding all the other carpenters and assistants and some of their spouses gathered in the workshop for the usual end-of-week beer session. Some of the guys wouldn't meet my eye, and some mumbled words of condolence, and one of them, Ben, said, "Hey, I was fired from my last job, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me. Maybe this is just what you needed." I guess it's to my credit that I didn't tell him just where he could stick that rosy sentiment. But I don't remember being especially gracious in my reply. The worst part of it all was that he was exactly right. He was entirely 100% correct. Being fired from that job was far and away the best thing that could have happened to me. And as I know we share these sermons on the internet, Ben, if you're watching, thank you. You were exactly right. And I apologize for the resentment that I've carried around that moment. The pain of that moment of being fired, the pain where I found my path forward suddenly blocked and barred, that pain revealed so many new paths. Within a few months, my wife Sarah and I were on a cross-country bicycle tour. We bicycled from Wisconsin to California. On that tour, I found myself having time to reflect on my career path and what I had failed so spectacularly at as a construction worker, as a food service employee, as a retail clerk, as an assistant for a guy who sold comic books on the internet. The many different jobs I'd had, I started to see the common threads. I started to realize that I needed to do something different with my professional aspirations. When we returned from that trip, I found work for the first time that felt truly meaningful and important, doing personal care work for adults with disabilities. And within a year, I had applied to and been accepted at Starr King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, my first step on the path towards Unitarian Universalist ministry. Passing through the shock and the shame of being fired and having the support of friends and family on that journey was an experience that, without which I would not be doing the work that I am doing today. And I had to pass through it. I had to go through that crucible. I had to face that pain and to absorb it, to try to begin to learn its lessons. I could have made other choices. I could have made choices that would have helped me avoid that pain. I could have drowned it in booze or numbed it out in another way, food or television or drugs or sex or other assorted busyness, any of the myriad methods that we have at our disposal for sidestepping the pains that are an integral part of life. And lest you think that I am some scold or, I realize I am preaching at you, but I want to assure you that I know and I believe that we do need those moments of respite, that we do need those times of relief to step back and make sense of what we are experiencing. The question, of course, is one of balance, of finding a way to bear a healthy amount of pain, because without the practice of enduring the lesser pains of life, we cannot develop the resilience that we will need to survive the great catastrophes that surely await us. A story that illustrates this process of building resilience comes to us from that audacious, tragic, absurdly theatrical experiment of the mid-90s called Biosphere 2. Does anyone remember Biosphere 2? For those for whom this is unfamiliar or not common cultural currency, this was an experiment located, I believe, in the Arizona desert that sought to create a totally self-contained, self-sustaining environment separate from the world as we know it, which is Biosphere 1. It was large domes that enclosed orchards and moving water and animals and every attempt that our best and brightest scientists could think of to create a totally self-contained environment. Maybe someday we would build a biosphere like it on Mars, or who knows. And I don't think it lasted 6 months. There were huge problems on every level because the world is too complex to be rebuilt inside of several small domes in the Arizona desert. One particular area of failure was in the orchards that had been planted to provide fruit for the bionauts that were living in this biosphere. What would happen is that the fruits would grow to a certain size on the branches, and after that point, they would fall off without ripening. What they discovered had happened is that out in the world of Biosphere 1, when fruit ripens on the branch, it's constantly subjected to even the gentlest breezes of wind, sometimes stronger gusts, but there's always moving air, and every motion of that fruit, every tiniest wiggle, creates a tiny fracture, a tiny break in the surface of the branch, in the structure of the branch that holds it. The tree repairs that fracture, and the branch becomes stronger. As Bob mentioned in talking about the world of weightlifting, this is the same process that occurs in our bodies when we lift weights or exercise. We create microscopic tears in our muscles. Our body repairs them. After the repair, the muscle is stronger. Without the minuscule pains of those fractures, of those movements of the wind, without the healing response of the tree to those breaks, the fruit cannot ripen. The fruit cannot stay on the tree. It falls before it ever has a chance to reach its potential. And I think it's also important, as we hold on to this idea of resilience, as we hold on to thinking about how our small daily practices can prepare us for larger pains, larger catastrophes, I think it's important to make something clear. All this talk about making meaning and being empowered in our choices and understanding, it's all well and good for me to stand here in this pulpit on a beautiful Sunday morning in good health and in no physical, emotional, or spiritual pain to speak of, and give you, a dozen or a dozen and a half minutes of my wisdom about pain. That said, I have known pain in my life, perhaps more than some, certainly, far less than others. And I have been witness to a great deal of pain of all kinds in my work as a chaplain. I have no illusions about pain I have yet to experience and perhaps can't even imagine. And I say this by way of explaining one of my great challenges and pet peeves as a chaplain, which is the well-intentioned but awfully far from the mark phrase, "God never gives you anything you can't handle." To that I say, horse feathers. And were I not in the pulpit right now, I'd be tempted towards stronger language. Life holds in store for us many joys and many heartbreaks, and I believe, because I have seen it, that each one of us has a breaking point. Each one of us has a moment where our individual resources are insufficient, where our capacity for resilience is overwhelmed, where we can stand against the storm no longer. And so I hate that expression, because while what it means to say is, you're a strong person and you can get through this, what it has the potential to say is, you can't handle the pain of life, and therefore you are a disappointment to God and you should be ashamed. And I tell you, there is no person now, there has been no person in the past, there will be no person in the future who is not capable of being utterly undone by life's tragedies and injustices and cruelties. There lurk storms out beyond the horizon strong enough to swamp any vessel. If you have found yourself overwhelmed and taken all to pieces by your pain, please hear this. You have nothing to be ashamed of, and you are not alone. We, all of us, are or have been or may one day soon be in that boat, and that's a message that I hope you take to heart if, like me, your sailing at the moment is by and large smooth. We can prepare in our small way for rougher seas, by practicing discernment, by being mindful of the smaller joys and sorrows of life, and by making space in our minds and hearts and lives to offer companionship to those who are in the heart of the struggle. Take it to heart. We must all be in this together, and take this to heart as well. Even if you have been given more than you can handle, you are not powerless and you are not alone. And even in the deepest moments of greatest harm lies a seed of redemption and hope. In this room, in this moment, this is the piece that is missing from the Gibran poem that I opened with. Community. We need that vertical connection with God or nature or ethics or whatever name you give to that force in your life that guides you towards making meaning of your experiences. And that connection comes through very strongly in Gibran's words. But just as much, we need this horizontal connection. We need peers and companions, fellow travelers to lead and follow, conversation and meditation and prayer partners to help us make sense of all this. And ultimately, I think this is the measure, the way we can navigate our course through pain towards meaning and resilience, the question on which it all hangs. How am I in company with others? How have my choices helped me to be of service to others? How are the lessons I am learning connecting me with other people and with whatever name I give to that which is most holy in my life? In the final measure, what is most important in navigating suffering, in making meaning of pain, is how it affects our capacity for intimacy. We are not unitary, solitary creatures. We are a people. And as a people, we owe it to ourselves and to those around us to embrace these moments, difficult as they may be, to turn to one another for help, to offer help. Because in the final analysis, our connections are what will guide us, what will save us, what will give us resilience for the difficult moments that have already been and may yet come. And so I say with deepest feeling, thank you for being here, because it is most good that we are together.